Howdy, all you delicious people! I'm here today to review Hellboy Sword of Storms. I had gone on to review so many Hellboy live action movies in the past, and I just kind of missed this character, as well as also I just wanted to do something animated, cartoon related, and this ended up being it. At some point, I'll go on and probably review Sailor Moon at some point in the future, because that seems to be just a random thing to check out. But, anyways, Sword of Storms is to be a rather interesting uh just bit of like supernatural content, as well as also just a variety of monsters in here. And it also is to make me trying to decipher and figure out what's going on in this movie, as not exactly everything is all well explained, it seems, within this project. Also, specifically, there is a part where Professor Sakai goes on and obtains this scroll and then goes on to be possessed by it, even though technically the spirits of both thunder and lightning are to be encaptured by the sword. Why is exactly uh, Professor Sakai to also have the spirits with thunder and lightning within inside of him? So Professor Sakai had obtained what I would call a cursed object. Say, for example, like the sword that is to have the soul of thunder and lightning could have been in the same exact room as Scroll and 5 other things. And with that sword being in that same room with the scroll, that item has some connection with sword. As well as also, the scroll is to have this story that, if read by a person, is to be affected or infected by them in a very certain manner, a very specific way. So we see that any number of things could be like a catch-all. If not the sword, then some other item of either knowledge of story or item that is to be somehow in the collection of the sword. Any number of things. There's so many artifacts that eventually can go on and all have some curse upon them that eventually will leave certain people to do certain tasks because they become temporary vessels for certain things. It's kind of like in the Constantine movie, where we'd come to find a person who is to randomly find the Spear of Destiny, and as soon as he goes on and finds this random item, he is to be somehow possessed and need to do this one task to unlock this certain thing. So Professor Sakai is no different. It's kind of like also in Ghostbusters 2. Ghostbusters 2, we have Vigo the Carpathian that is stuck in the painting. He can't do anything. He doesn't have a foot soldier. He doesn't have a guy on the ground. So eventually, Vigo goes on to find Janisch, and so he goes on and sends lightning through his eyes to eventually force Janisch and manipulates him into basically being his lackey. So any number of these examples here are kind of the same thing of the whole cursed object of scroll thing, of eventually Professor Sakai becoming a temporary vessel or follower for Thunder and Lightning to try and have the main focus goal to try and free them, because he had touched this cursed item that was connected to them in some way. So let's further go on and pull back this story. So the beginning of it just has this mission that has no real connection of rest of Taya film. It's just something to showcase our characters if you're not quite familiar with any of them. That doesn't have a connection to the whole rest of the story here. We have Red, who's Hellboy, who will just say Red throughout a good chunk of this because it's easier. Then we have Abe, who's to be a Fishman character. that isn't to be the exact same as the Ron Perlman Hellboy version of him. He's not to be a psychic or a bookworm character. We just bring in bureau investigators that are to go on and just kind of fill those shoes, but are also to be kind of pointless in the overall scheme of things because they're just there to just eat up more time in this animated movie. They're not, I think, used very well. So then we have Liz, who's to kind of be the catch all. If it seems that these characters are to be up against insurmountable odds, Liz is to be sent in to just wipe everything out. We have at some point where we have the story of Red, who's to separate from everyone and go into what I would either call a separate realm of things or a pocket dimension to be facing off against a number of foes. And we have Liz and Abe who end up getting their own separate bit of task going on. And then we have Kate, this bureau investigator, with this guy named Thorn, who's this psychic that eventually ends up dealing with possessed items. And we have Kate, who's to lend at some point to being a bookworm character that is to kind of be some brief explanation of certain things going on in this movie, but not quite good enough. So, in my opinion. But we make our way into a number of these different stories kind of fighting for real estate here, as well as also having to go on and thoroughly explain the whole story of the Thunder and Lightning brothers that are to face off against the daimyo, to then have the samurai warrior come in and face off against both brothers, to then in turn, when the warrior of samurai does succeed, make his way back to the daimyo, it kind of becomes pointless for him going on to have achieved that task, because eventually the daimyo is to just kind of feel guilty by the fact that he had made this promise that he will, of course, never fulfill. So he goes on to then, in turn, against the good people, and then they all become ghosts, and they're all on this endless loop of having the daimyo's daughter wanting to go on and find her champion to free her from her father that is to be trying to kill her on a loop, hoping that Hellboy will at some point figure out a way to stop this story from happening, convince the ghosts to just stop, so that way finally they can be put to rest. And to me, that feels like the Jeff Goldblum High Spirits movie. But anyways, so, or even the recent movie that I'd seen recently called Echo. Yeah, Echo. So it may not really be that good, but it's still a movie that exists. So I want to compare this movie mostly to stuff like the Lara Croft live action movies, or also I want to compare it to mainly Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3. Even to the point to where we have one of the guys that goes on to talk to Mikey in Ninja Turtles 3, and he says, Kappa! And Michelangelo's like, Kappa? Cappuccino? No, it makes me hyper. And then Splinter says, it's like, no, Kappa, that's a completely different thing. And then they whip out the scrolls, and they realize that Ninja Turtles are legends. And we come to find that also within this movie, there is also a Kappa that Red faces off against. And it's the whole strategy of figuring out how to defeat that Kappa. And so it's an interesting bit of battle here. The biggest missed opportunity I feel that is within this film is that Kate does not go along with Red to better explain who all the monsters that he faces off against are. Or even there is to be not much of any explanation of who any of these monsters are, or much of these characters, regardless of time allotted or what have you. They just don't take the time. They don't care. They're just like, okay, we're just gonna just chuck a number of these cool visuals and hope people will be like, about it. Be all thumbs up and all happy and praise and just enjoy this without anything really needing to be explained. So we could have learned a number of things about Japanese folklore, but we didn't. We're just left to just be like, well, cool visual. Anyways, the whole goal of it is that Hellboy is to be holding on to the sword in this other realm or dimension, and he is to be trying to defend it because there are a number of people that are trying to steal it from him, and they're trying to break it with the goal of breaking it so they can unleash both thunder and lightning out onto the world to wreak havoc. The whole thing also is that Hellboy will never go on and escape wherever he is until the sword ends up getting broken anyways. So, in all honesty, Hellboy kind of needs to break the sword regardless. So, the sword does get broken. The two Thunder and Lightning do get released. Red faces off against them and eventually is to figure out a way to encage the monster again and withhold the beast. To kind of bring us right back to status quo within this project. Or to kind of hit the reset button. Kind of like eventually how in like the Wishmaster movies, eventually there is to go on and at some point be a wish that kind of sends everything back to reset to feasibly go on and have stuff just never go on and happen. So people don't know that anything has transpired or to have gone on or what have you. So, with that said, this movie at the end of the day was okay. I really did want to thumbs this movie up, and I feel like I could go on and do that. It did remind me a lot of Hellboy Crooked Man. If you guys have gone on to see that live action thing and may have enjoyed it, you may like this also. There is Blood and Iron that is to be a sequel of this, is another thing of this. So, if you were to possibly have seen this, you may go on like that. Maybe you had seen either or of these things, I don't know. But either way, they're here. You can check them out. This movie specifically is to be available on Tubi, TUBI. You can check that out there. It's an hour and 17 minutes. It's not that long. So, there's that for you. Blood and Iron, that is to not be on Tubi. That is to actually be on a number of different apps altogether, like Slings and weird goofy things. But at least it's still available. I'll go on and I'll recommend a number of apps here that are to be of a bootleg variety. So if you have a Google Play Store, if you have a mobile device, you can probably find these. First off, I'll recommend Movie Box 3. That's another app that you could probably use. Hopefully that's still available on a Google Play Store for you to go on and find. You can go through a Google search and search an app called Moopzzi, Moopzzi. The logo will have a green, like a light green M on it. So that's when you know it's Moopzzi, and you'll probably be able to maybe download an APK of this or whatever. You'll probably go on and find it, be able to download this app, be able to watch this movie, and there you go. I have no idea. You also may be to go on and make your way into an app called Kleed Plus, KLED Plus. This will probably more than likely have Swords of Storm there and other Hellboy movies to check out. I don't think it has Blood and Iron on there, but if anything, you could see all these other movies if Tubi is no longer available to have this movie. So you can check it out there. Anyways, other than that, as far as future reviews is going to be concerned, because I'm going to transition here to get into spoiler time, because it's about that spoiler time. Spoiler time, about that time again to spoil this movie. Future reviews. I honestly was fairly tempted to, weirdly enough, review Sailor Moon of all things. I have never gone on to see one iota of Sailor Moon ever in my life, so I wanted to eventually go on and review some anime projects, as well as also some cartoon things, and Sailor Moon just kind of quickly came onto my radar of knowledge of existing. And I'd never really gone on to see it, so I'm like, hey, I can maybe watch a couple of episodes of it just to kind of just see what it's about. Just to also to know how much that it's still a thing from time to time comes into the pop culture of referencing and some are involved of. So all the more reason for me to want to go on and check Sailor Moon out. Uh, Other than that, as far as future reviews is concerned, of anything new beyond like just saying, hey, yeah, I'm probably still going to review at some point Beastmaster and the Phantom because I've mentioned that throughout a billion other reviews. And everything just keeps going on to just have another project that just kind of comes in front of what I was going to do. So I was going to go on and I was tempted to check out a series called Hell on Wheels. I don't think that that show probably has any real importance nowadays, but I'm just like, F it, man. I'm going to just check out these shows, see if anybody really cares about them anymore, and just go about that. I'm trying to experiment a lot more on this channel. I'm trying to just find, I think maybe shows more so matter than maybe movies do. So hopefully I'll go on and just find some show that garners some true interest in people and eventually uh, find that be a way of just continuing my justification of just uh, doing these projects. I have no I'm grasping at straws at this point. There is to be a number of eventual cartoon things that I have had people voted on, and eventually I will go into those. To probably explain what they all are now, I'm not quite sure because I just kind of I just put a bunch of stuff on there, and at some point I'll probably go on, and I probably will get to those. I don't know if it's going to be anytime soon, but if anything, if I am to go on and see that people are to like something, I will eventually go on and check it out. Other than that, yeah, like let's go on. Let's break down this movie because I think it's about that time to. Thank you for going on and watching this because I'm sure you may go on to have dropped out at some point. That's perfectly okay because I appreciate anybody going out of their way to check these projects out. I hope at some point I will go on and just find something within this channel that is to be all worthwhile, and I will be able to put myself back on the map of this thing. But until that time comes, I'm to just continue to experiment, continue to just find these random things that eventually will just take up content time, and that is to really be what it is. There are sometimes also where I feel that I need to take an effing break. And it feels like every once in a while I've been going on to just kind of do that. Because there is to also just be a time of like, well, what does it matter? Or what is what is any of this going to do anymore? Like, is any of this really going to move the needle? I highly doubt it. So it's just like the whole second guessing, the whole like really realizing that research is not to be good enough, but I'm still just pushing forward as best as I can. So with that said, let's push forward, get into the breakdown, the spilling or reviewing of all this all, and go out of my way to pause here to whip out all I need to whip out to describe this movie to you, the viewer. At some point, I may trip and fall over certain names of certain things because certain things would be way, very long winded, and also to be things that I've to not gone on and consistently pronounce. So with that said, if I butcher under any names of things, I am to just really just not clearly know what exactly I'm talking about when I'm naming things off. But regardless, I'm to figure out more so than maybe other people of what things actually are to be. So with that said, let's pause here and let's whip out all that stuff out so I can just do a lot of this to further extend this video. Thank you for watching this. I do appreciate it. Thank you. Let me pause this here. All right. So in the very beginning of this movie, we come to find that if you aren't familiar with this character whatsoever, there is a brief origin of Hellboy. Matching up fairly similar to the very first Hellboy movie, so feasibly, like, there is not a huge, like, adjustment of Hellboy source material that if you haven't gone on and seen the original Ron Perlman movie, that there is to be much of difference there. So, getting to the very beginning of this piece, we come to find Abe making his way through this underwater hole into this temple, because it's the only way to enter into it. Well, at some point, come to find that Red is to also be in the same temple, facing off against a zombie bat that is to be of gigantic size. But otherwise, we come to find Abe making his way out of this water-like hole to then have Liz following him in this scuba gear. Abe is to drop a glowing stick of light, and Liz is to start to take off her scuba gear, mentioning that water is not normally her element, and then she is to surround her body with flame because that is to be her power, that is to be her fire starter, whatever kind of power here that she has. So Liz goes on, bursts herself into flame to just dry herself off. So Abe and Liz start to make their way into the temple here to eventually come to find what is to be known within this movie as slime. I would much more want to call it ectoplasm, but I guess that's just me wanting to just say something more creative than just slime. It wasn't slime, it was ooze. So, as Abe and Liz make it to a hole that has a skeleton of Agent Hamilton, and they find out what had happened to this agent, we accidentally have Abe that is to touch a brick of ground that is to seemingly be pushed down further to open up a trap, which is to be a wall that is to open and have a number of mummified zombies of Mayan descent that are to go on and attack both Abe and both Liz here. Abe and Liz are to maybe assess what to exactly do with these monsters with their guns as they whip them out, to assume that if they just shoot them that they will go down. Not quite the case, so they have to go on and kind of really figure out how to perfectly take them out here. So we then get a zombie bat that is flying its way through the scene here. Eventually come to find that Hellboy is to be flying his way to face off against it also. Abe and Liz look at the zombified bat and are to thrust their weapons upon it to blast. Eventually, the zombie bat is to grab onto Abe here, and Red is to jump on top of it to, of course, hope that it will release both Abe, but then also have the zombie bat hopefully more so focus on Red instead. As, of course, Red is going on and thrusting his red right hand, which is to be the more bigger hand here to smash against this creature. So as further and further more mummified zombies make their way into the playing field here, and eventually the zombie bat is continuing to take Red down here, it seems that odds are coming more so insurmountable. Hellboy is getting very frustrated by the fact that the zombie bat is continuing to fly into the air and wants to figure out a way to neutralize it. Hellboy goes on and is to eventually find this bat statue that has a head upon it, rips the head off and chucks it at the bat to finally have the bat much more so knocked down, so it eventually is to be at more of a ground to ground combat with Red. At some point, as further zombies start to, or mummies, Mayans, whatever these characters are, continue to surround both Liz and both Abe. Abe turns to Liz and says to her, "This isn't working," basically stating that, "Hey, Liz, time to get to Torton, time to get to your power." Because, of course, Liz's power is to be this catch-all that just wipes everything out. So, and of course, if you don't remember in the Hellboy movies where Liz would go on and be like, "You should be running," and this and that, of course, if you remember the first movie. So, Liz is hoping that there's a chance that they still have, but eventually they're like, "Hey, come on. Just use your power." So, Liz goes on and starts to have her eyes turn into flame. Eventually, we start to see the Mayans, the zombies, the mummies. They start to burst into flame themselves, and they start to one by one fall onto the ground. We see that Liz is engulfed in flame, and eventually the room is starting to copy that same seemingly cosmetic taste. So we then would go on and have Bat Zombie facing off against Hellboy, as Hellboy is to be punching it with right hand. And then shortly thereafter, the zombie bat is to start to be covered in flames as well, to eventually be left on this bat statue and eventually get defeated here. As the good guys start to circle around, they start to see that the bad guys are to eventually turn into skeletons. Both Abe and Red turn to Liz. They're like, "Well, yeah, I think we've done it. Like, I think you can turn it off now." Liz continues to do what she's to have already done, and eventually Red makes his way to Liz because he's the only one that is to, of course, be flame retardant. He, like, fire doesn't affect him because he's from hell. So Red goes on to eventually knock some sense into Liz to just kind of wake her up, and is like, "Hey Liz, kiddo." So eventually Liz snaps out of it, and then snaps the flames from her body, and both Red and Liz embrace in a hug. Liz turns to Red asking what exactly she had missed, and yeah, the next thing we see is Professor Sakai. Professor Sakai makes his way into his office to eventually find this mysterious box at his doorstep. Sakai goes on to eventually make his way into opening this box and eventually uses tools to make his way into finding out that this box is to have a scroll. Professor Sakai starts to read this scroll, talking about the Brothers of the Dragons, talking about both Thunder and Lightning, and talking about their dangerous weapons. We would come to find that Thunder is to have a hammer and is to have mountains crumble, and we in turn also have Lightning that has a spear of white fire. I don't know what white fire is different than lightning, but anyways. So both Thunder and Lightning face off against the Daimyo, and the Daimyo goes on at a weakened state to promise both brothers that he will offer his daughter to them. So after the awareness of these brothers going on to have made this deal to the daimyo, the next thing we see is the daimyo's daughter going on and meeting up with the samurai warrior. The samurai warrior is to go on and grasp the daimyo's daughter's hand, and then eventually go on to war to face off against thunder and lightning, hoping that he can figure out a way to trick them into this sword and capture them forever. To me, this is to be like in so many ways similar. If I haven't said this already, this is to be kind of like Suicide Squad. When you really look at it, Liz is like the character from the Suicide Squad movie called El Diablo, where he kind of turns into this kind of big, massive flame of a character, as well as also, uh, there is this Suicide Squad member called Katana, and Katana captures souls into her sword. And yeah, very much similar, oddly enough, to other superhero characters. But if anything, maybe you're to go on and find any number of these superhero characters fascinating. Maybe you check out their comic books or whatever. I'm just mentioning some similarities. Maybe if you've never seen Suicide Squad ever in your life, maybe you'll check out that film. I don't know. Or maybe you already have checked out that film and you have your own reservations about it. It is what it is. I like the film, but regardless, like there's some movies where I can be easily pleased than others. So we go on in a very long-winded way to have this samurai go on and face off against thunder and lightning and capture them into this sword. While Professor Sakai goes on and continues to read this story, we start to see that eventually he is to, by reading this cursed object, starting to become infected by it, to the point to where we start to see a zooming in of his eye, and his eye seems to have a spark of bluish like lightning to be within it. Also, I probably should have said this beforehand. It seems that a good chunk of this movie has a lot of kind of flashing and stuff like that. If people are to easily have certain kind of seizures because of just flashing of lightning, maybe I wouldn't have recognized or recommended this project, but I didn't mention that up until now. I forgot about it. Anyways, after the samurai warrior goes on to capture both thunder and lightning into the sword, the warrior makes his way back to the daimyo. We had come to find that the daimyo after that is to realize that he is to kind of he is kind of to have gone on to realize that he kind of didn't go on and commit to his first arrangement. So eventually he went on to make his way to a shrine and eventually ask the gods, like, if what he did was right, and if he should like lead the rest of his life in shame. And eventually the gods had answered him. So in turn, the daimyo comes back and meets up with the samurai warrior, turning him into a statue. And then in turn, we see Professor Sakai, who is just seeing a lot of flashes of both thunder and lightning as he's continuing to read this scroll. Sakai makes his way to Toshiro. And eventually Toshiro is to talk to the professor and see what is to have happened. And we come to find that Toshiro is none other than the guy who is to have owned the samurai sword. And so we probably come to find that Professor Sakai is really making his way to Shishiro just to get this sword. But we'll come to find that he won't actually obtain it. That eventually Red will go on and obtain it instead. So what happens here as the professor is to talk to Shishiro? Sakai makes his way to the sword and breaks the display that is to be withheld of the sword. A number of glass goes flying and hits Shishiro to where he ducks to try to avoid all the glass flying at him. And then we start to see all of these blades starting to fly within the air. Surrounding Toshiro is a number of swords, to where eventually we have the one sword to end up stopping Sakai because the spirits of the samurai warrior, the daimyo's daughter, as well as also just the daimyo, end up stopping Sakai and thrusting him to this desk. And here's where we come to find that Sakai has like vessels within him, both thunder and lightning, as a shadowy figures. So we also see this huge energy blast that really goes on to really showcase very well here of when there's to be a really massive scale of cosmic event of supernatural presence. I just say a whole huge amount of big words here, so if anything, shit just got real is what I really meant. Is when we start to see this like blast of psychic kinetic energy of sorts. So the next thing we see is Red, Liz, and Abe all in this chopper. They come to find that the guys are on the intercom letting them know about a storm coming, and Red thinks that is quite unusual. So they take the time here to start talking to Liz. And it is kind of funny how Liz ends up seeing herself as well more of a freak than both Red and Abe, but like it is really interesting to see how Liz just kind of thinks of herself. So Liz goes on and says that she's so much more of a freak than both Red and Abe are. And Abe and Red start cracking jokes where it's like, yeah, Liz, like, maybe you shouldn't go on and be walking with guys like us. And they start making a joke of it because, like at least you can walk around in public. Like both Red and Abe, like they can't walk around anywhere with anybody freaking out. So Liz is to also state that maybe she should be locked up and have thrown away the key and all this. And if anything, she is not really much of a threat. Like in all honesty, specifically in this version, or if anything, like I think in the Ron Perlman Hellboy movies, like you could probably much more understand why she is a real legitimate threat. Because in the movies, we have Liz who, like, while she's just sleeping, her power just turns on and her whole room around her explodes. So that makes a lot more sense in the movie of why she is really a threat. Whereas in this project, I don't quite understand exactly why she is to be much more of a threat compared to both Red and Abe here. So Red goes on and explains to Liz here that the world needs what they can do. And that ends up making them, in Red, Liz, and Abe's mind, the good guys here. And for Red, that's enough. Like, if anything, there are some times where Hellboy is not exactly seen as a good person, because most of the time he is to be seen as the Noxun Rama guy, the other guy that ends up having the huge horns and is from hell and is to have the right arm that unlocks the portal to hell and blah 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 blah. So yeah, Hellboy in certain ways is to seemingly be seen as this threat-like character, but like he has been raised in a certain environment to not be this bad guy. So if anything, yeah, that's why like there is some aspect of Hellboy where it's like, okay, kind of proceed with caution, but also um like he needs to continue to remember who he is, remember that he's to try to do good, and that's all that he can continue to try to do. So as the chopper lands, they meet up with Kate. Kate goes on to explain how she is to have gone on and been so happy that she was doing this study that she's writing a paper on it, and that she had gone on to find, instead of these wolves, these Vikings, these berserker Vikings. And so Kate is all excited about this. She's like, "Yeah, I can't wait to write this story about it. I can't wait to write this paper." And both Liz and Abe are like, "Yeah, I can't wait to read it." Like, this girl is way too excited about all this, and like maybe it's because she doesn't have enough field experience, right? Maybe when she finally goes on to be on the field, maybe she'll feel quite differently about certain things. But if anyways, so Kate is to go on and explain to Red, Abe, and Liz that they're going to go on to yet another mission. That it's all about Japanese folklore, and Red is like, "Well, hey, I'm headed to the shower and sauna for a couple hours, and I'll be back." Um, but Kate is adamant about this. So we then go on to see Thorn. Thorn is this psychic who has this tape recorder. Thorn is to be on site next to all these hazmated guys, and Red is to be present, and they're trying to figure out what had all happened here. This supernatural like event. So we have Toshiro, that if these people will not go on and exactly buy into his story, or exactly Toshiro is to feel that he didn't fully explain everything, Toshiro conveniently also has this tape recording of this room to explain exactly what had all happened. So eventually they replay the tape and eventually find that Sakai had touched the display, broken the glass, and they kind of replay what had all happened in prior. So come to find out, um, Kate is to have known about uh, the Professor Sakai. Very convenient because, of course, she knows. And Kate is to go on to mention how she was in some conference and had done a paper, and eventually Red is to go on and um, and say it's like, well, man, Kate, like you've really gone on to make a really good career of yourself, and uh, like why are you here? Like, aren't you to have been a person who would even research trolls? And Kate is like, well, yeah, no, I work with one, which immediately she's looking at Red. So Red ended up standing up here and they find out a piece of paper or a piece of a file here that goes on to talk about Professor Sakai, finding out what he had kind of been doing, and so we all of a sudden come to find that both um, Toshiro and both Thorn are going on and wrestling over something because Thorn is going to go on and touch something just to try to get some psychic thing off of it, and Toshiro won't let him. Kate ends up getting involved between the two of them, and and Thorn is kind of bickering about like, well, hey, this guy is ruining my psychic reading, and Kate is to try to calm them both down. Hellboy is looking at the hazmatic guys as it seems that they are to go on, and their intel about what had happened all here just sounds really dumb, or just like, why are we wasting our time having these guys just inspect this area? They're not going to come up with much of anything. So we go on to have Red find this fox next to this sword. Red immediately turns to this fox and asks it if there's something that it can help it with. And eventually the fox vanishes. Hellboy realizes that there must be something important with this sword, so he takes it and looks at it and eventually disappears. Here's where he ends up in this other realm, this other spiritual world. I have no idea. Either way, we come to find that Red is to see this fox yet again, and he continues to follow it. Again, with Red saying, oh crap. So, Kate is to look around for Red to realize that he has somehow disappeared. Red goes on to eventually, sword in hand, to continue to follow this fox. The fox goes on to state to Hellboy that he's not a normal man. It's like, well, what gave it away? And Hellboy asks why exactly he's here. And the fox doesn't really have any answer but to tell him it's like, well, hey, The only reason why you're here is because you have the Sword of Storms. And it's tasted the blood of demons, whatever that means. And eventually, the fox is to explain that Red will not be able to leave here until the sword is broken, but then also, if the sword ends up getting broken, then both Thunder and Lightning will also be freed as well. So, Red goes on to find a bunch of fireballs telling him where to go next as they float past him. They all light up this way of this home, and so Red follows. Red goes on to find Daimyo's daughter crying for her love. Eventually, at one point, the spirit gets confused with Red, with her past lover, and cries out, "Why did you not come for me? You sent me here while you face those terrible demons." And when the storms ended, I knew I had been rescued from my father's pledge, and I waited, but you never came. Once I thought I heard you, but I was mistaken. Here's where we then go on to have Red realize that this is the point where the daimyo's daughter is to have gotten killed. Because the daimyo is to appear behind his daughter and is to have a sword and is going to be raising the sword against his daughter and killed her, which then made her dead. So the daimyo's daughter was going to assume that at some point the samurai hero, the samurai warrior, was going to come for her, was going to interrupt this, and he never did. So eventually, because considering Red has the Sword of Storms, I guess we just have to assume that this woman is to just see Red as her lover. So the ghost is to be very upset for why Red had never came for her. So Red ends up telling her, he's like, "Well, I'm sorry, but you got the wrong guy." Red leaves, makes his way back out, notices the fox. The fox explains to Red that he's been put on a dangerous path and that Red just needs to continue to move east and protect the sword and make his way towards the rising sun. Well, I guess, yeah, like you really need to go on and you need to have Red, like, really just stay along the sun because if anything, once night falls, yeah, Red is not going to be as protected because that's the whole lore of like everything bumps the most at night. So, and also in the, is it the east or in the west does the sun set? I'm not quite sure. So regardless, yeah, like that's the reason why Red needs to continue east. So back with the Hazmatic folks and Thorn. Thorn is to try to make some psychic connection here. And Thorn is to be talking about east, asking which way is east. So it seems that Thorn has some connection with Hellboy from whatever realm he's in. So one of the Hazmatic men go on to grab one of these little toy statues and puts it into this ceiling uh, container of sorts. Kate is making a call, being interrupted by Thorn about some umbrella. And here's, I think, where Kate is going on and using the satellite from the Bureau to try to figure out where exactly Hellboy is on Earth, which they won't find that answer. The Bureau goes on to be with both Liz and Abe. Liz and Abe are asking one of their agents there why it's taking so long for them to find where Red is. And it's like, well, hey, we're doing everything we can. We're widening the search, but if anything, we just can't find him. Liz is getting ever more so angry to where her eyes are starting to glow of a yellow. Liz and Abe will eventually need to go on and realize that at some point they'll need to go on to a mission of their own. And we have a point where they keep bringing up that Liz is going to have to just go up against the little stuff, or is to go on up against not so little stuff. Like, it seems to be a pattern of them keep going back to that same well as far as dialogue is concerned. So they go on and they mention how, like, there was a problem trying to find Hellboy before, and eventually they wanted to find Hellboy kind of frozen in the past in Prague. So, and they found him 8 weeks later. Let me pause here for a second. So Kate goes on and eventually is to find the hazmat people. Being close to the scroll, she picks up the scroll, she goes on to start reading the story, and eventually is to surmise that after reading the story, she is to realize about the Sword of Storms, as well as also that Professor Sakai is to be possessed. The next thing we come to see is lightning striking around the area that Professor Sakai is in this dark alley next to this chef, or next to this restaurant worker who is just throwing the trash within this dumpster. The chef goes on to turn to find in this puddle a reflection of the professor. The chef goes on to make his way to the Professor Sakai to try and scare him off, and if anything, it doesn't work. The chef tries to go on and take this stick out, and eventually what is to just happen is Sakai is to have lightning come from off of his body and eventually lead the chef, I think, to just run away here. Sakai goes on to eventually roll out this scroll and puts a very first uh, kind of chess piece like puzzle on uh, onto this board. This is to go on and have us realize that eventually Hellboy will face off against his very first foe, which this somewhat chess piece will go on and represent here. And eventually will showcase to us at some point that Hellboy will go on and face off against the new the new Kubi. These characters that are to go on and seemingly have their heads be separate from their bodies, and eventually they have an unusual weakness to light. So, Hellboy has been driven into exhaustion, eventually to have made his way into the woods, and is to realize, like, you know what, damn, like, I'm making so much headway here, but I'm just so exhausted. Maybe I'll go on and make some legit progress within the morning. So, Hellboy, or Red, goes on and just flops down at this tree and tries to get some shut eye to just be awakened by this man with the stick, stating to him that, hey, like, you're going to be in danger if you stay into this forest for too long. Like, how about you just come with me and I'll protect you? And Red is like, oh, yeah, sure, you're going to be the guy that protect me from danger. Sure, sure, sure. So, Red follows this guy and makes his way to this home. Red goes on and is to notice that it seems that this guy with the stick is to be within this home where there are to be a number of people filled into it. And we come to find that these people are also to be these randos that are to have made their way to this man's home also to just kind of make their way to just sleep for the night. But we'll also come to find that all these characters are to be technically the the new Kai, or the new Nukubai, the Nukubi, Nukebi. I have no idea how to exactly pronounce this. Uh, the creatures, the headless creatures. So we even go on to have one of these guys who want to go on and want to tell Red a funny story. And once the guy goes on to try to explain the funny story, Red is to go on after hearing it, like, that's not really much of a funny story, but okay. Like, I'll take your word for it. So, after Red goes on and hears this story, and then explains how he's awfully tired, to where the guy with the stick heads uh, Red to his room for the night. One of the women with a fan ends up kind of uh, putting her fan away from her mouth, and we see that her teeth are sharp, like shark teeth. The guy goes on to explain that this house that they're in is to be very safe, and Red is like, well, yeah, I bet it is. So Red goes on to have the sword in front of him and goes into this almost meditative like sleep. Red, at some point in the night, goes on to awaken hearing sounds. Red goes on to whip out his revolver, or his Marriott, or whatever he calls his very specific gun. I don't remember exactly the term, but I know in the Ron Perlman very first Hellboy movie, he goes on and explains exactly what it is and goes in depth about it. Um, and then there's also a very, like, I really would have wished that at some point they would have gone on to give Hellboy a lot more creative bits of weaponry. Yeah, this revolver, it's always really nice, but like it would kind of be better if like they ended up giving him like that big huge cannon weapon that they call it like the big baby or the crybaby or whatever that weapon is in the Golden Army. But it seemed very rare that like Hellboy has like a barrage of different kinds of weaponry. Like that would have made this character a little bit more interesting, if nothing else. Because like most of the time, like he always has a very limited amount of weaponry, or it's just kind of like it's kind of just the same old thing where he just has to just punch everything to death. It kind of gets stale after a while. So as Red makes his way into a room, realizing that all the people who had been in it before had a both body with all their heads obtained upon them, Red goes into a room to find that there is a bunch of corpses without any of their heads. And so Red makes the assumption that all these people may have gotten killed. He's trying to figure out where the blood is. So the next thing we see is all these bodies are to be tied together and thrown into a lake. And then eventually, Red is to be walking into the night. The next thing we see is Red going on and finding within the woods. He goes on to find the uh, the new Kube all talking to one another, and they assess that Red must be sleeping by now, and they're all talking about how starving they are, and they're all also talking about the broken, how they want the broken sword, and because they're saying that Red is a fine meal, and all they have to do after they've gone on to collect him is break the sword afterwards. So they know about the broken sword, that they need to do that task, and that they're gonna work along with the Brothers of the Dragons. So one of the heads return to all the others and explain how the bodies are now all gone, and that they assume that Red has taken all of their bodies. So now all the heads start freaking out, and they start having their eyes all start to turn into lights so they can try to go on and find Red to eventually ask him where their bodies are so they can find him, hoping that they'll get an answer before sunlight happens. So the heads all go on to eventually make their way to Red, and they yell, "Get him!" We start to see that Red is to be blasting away with his revolver all some of these heads. Eventually, they start grabbing at Hellboy's coat, trench coat, arms, and what have you. Red mentions that they were going to eat him, and eventually, uh, the heads are all hoping that they'll get Red to talk here. One of the heads turns to Red and asks him where exactly that he had put in their bodies. And the more and more Red does not go on and answer, they're getting so frustrated, realizing how much time they're wasting. So eventually, as Red continues to try to like kind of thrust away these heads and try to figure out a way to kind of strategically just kind of milk this out, because all he needs to do is just wait till sunrise. And eventually, the further and further they even plead to him for their bodies, and we have Red that goes on and breaks off a tree branch and starts facing off and batting away these heads, and even makes the joke about like, well, hey, thanks for the batting practice, but look, the sun's up. Sunrise starts to happen, and we further start to see these heads start to burst into flame. As there's to be one head left, still curious about what had happened to the bodies, Red finally does go on and explain about how he dropped them in the lake, but it's a waste of time for that knowledge to be spent now, knowing because all these heads are going to burst into flame and explode here. Sakai goes on and looks through his scroll to find out that, of course, uh, the the new Kabis had all lost, had all died. Leaving for there to eventually have Sakai, who is going to eventually give yet another chess piece upon this board, and eventually there'll be further chess pieces to eventually make insurmounting odds against Hellboy stacking the deck. So, back with Abe and Liz, they're going on to find out that the storms that are to be present are not to be just a coincidence of them occurring. Uh, that they're picking up technical anomalies. That there are certain places of sizable earthquakes, some places intense, and there are certain fault lines that they have to be worried about. And with them finding out about all these weather issues, they're wanting to try to figure out where to just kind of focus on to eventually have both Kate and Abe, or Kate, have both Liz and Abe try to figure out where exactly to go. So they talk about how since Hellboy is no longer like here with them, that not only will Kate be over her head of what to do next, but also uh, that Abe and Liz are the good guys, so like they should also realize how they need to be useful as well. There's nothing coming from these scenes. There really isn't. So Sakai goes on and puts it yet another chess piece on the board here. And I honestly think that this chess piece is to actually be the woman with the spider legs, and I believe that that creature is to actually go on and be known as the uh, do, do, um, Jorogumo. Jorogumo. Or also, I think my assumption was it to call it something else. Also, interesting fun fact for those of you who have ever gone on and to maybe to have known that there was a Ghostbusters game that was released at some point, and like some people would go on and call that Ghostbusters game like the third movie in a lot of ways because of how well written it actually is, surprisingly. Uh, there is at one point a level within that story where there is, I think, I want to say it's Egon and Ray that go into this hotel, and at one point they need to go to the 13th floor, and then the 13th floor goes on and has a Spider Woman. And eventually, yeah, like if you go on and you are to like Spider Woman, like you'll go on, you'll see the exact same thing in here, uh, within there. So that I think was just kind of like while watching this, I was just to be reminded of that Ghostbusters video game, and I was like, okay, cool, like we're seeing this kind of occur here. So Hellboy starts making his way into this forest that has turned very yellow and almost very fall-like. So as Hellboy starts to make his way to the forest, we start to see more spider webs. We, as Hellboy is walking around the ground, start to see more spiders. And within the trees, we start to see more webbing. So Hellboy goes on and meets with uh, the Zoragamu. God, do I have to keep pronouncing that? Or Jorogamu. Jorogamu. Jorogamu! Yeah, I'm gonna remember that every single time I have to say it. Jorogamu. Red meets with the Jorogamu, and I just have to keep saying it so I can remember it. As the Jorogamu is now playing this, I would say it's a guitar, but it's one of those guitars that are on the ground. I think they had called it a koto, but I'm not quite sure if that's the exact pronouncing of this instrument. And if anything, for those of you that are to know exactly what this guitar instrument is, let me know in the comments below so you can correct me, because that's fine. Because that also just helps me to be like, okay, I can figure out what the heck this is. Because there would be some times where I'm not familiar with things, and I would go out of my way to take the time to Google search it and and try to figure out what it is. But there's also a lot of times where I'm just like, what is the point of this? Like, yeah, I can learn something and then also I can explain what it is. But yeah, it's just like there's a lot of times where it's like, yeah, it's kind of pointless because really I'm just kind of in a rush to just try to get this thing done anyways. And moving on. So it seems that Jorogumu, fuck, long ass name, is to go on and play a song of her own composition. And really this woman goes on to explain how lucky Red is that he had come at the perfect time to hear this performance. Yeah, I'm sure he'll find how really lucky he really is at some point. When eventually she is to go on and try to kill him. So the Jorogamu tries to go on and tell Red just to sit and enjoy himself. And let the tune just ease his burden, which he's like, yeah, I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. So Red goes on to explain to her that he has somewhere to go, and eventually, oh yeah, listen to the tone of this koto. Yeah, that's what she says what it is. So I'm assuming that's right. So maybe in the future, if I ever go on and see this instrument again, hopefully I'll remember that and not have it just completely blink out of my mind. I've seen that in certain other films, a instrument of that, and I never really truly got what the name of it is. But anyways, Jorogumo, as she continues to play this koto, we start to find that the strings of the instrument start to be covered with blood. It doesn't sound like a good Tuesday night. So, as further the strings all tend to bleed here, so it seems we'll close to be Red matching the same fate here. As Red is to start to go on and have these webs start to grab him, and he's starting to get pulled within the trees. And as he gets pulled into the trees, we start to see these spiders all crawling down, having Jorogumo explain how Red will be fed to her children, which is to just be a load of spiders. The spiders all gather around Hellboy's sword to try to separate the sword away from Red here, and we would then go on to have the Jorogumo reveal to us its legs, and eventually uh Red will go on and slice himself away from his webbing and escape and start to run away from the Jorogumo. As Hellboy starts to run through the forest, the Jorogumo will kind of as if she is to be Cyclops's X-Men or X-Men Cyclops, and she will start having lasers just coming from her eyes to just start like lasering away through the forest. I don't know why, but she has this ability. Hellboy is dodging these lasers coming from out of this woman's eyes, trying to avoid these blasts. And more, the Jorogumo is just to be screaming and to be very upset here. As of course, so is the Professor Sakai, who is to realize that yet another monster has failed him this day. And his glowing eyes with red. So, we now have at this point where both Abe and both Liz are on their own mission via this plane, and they are making their way to Honolulu. And it's either Honolulu or Tokyo. I think it is Honolulu. So, yeah. I'm trying to correct myself here. So, the Bureau comes to find that there is a horrible storm of brewing that they probably cannot avoid. So, Abe just goes back into the plane and straps into his seat and is to tell Liz that they definitely need a new travel agent. And they start cracking just plain jokes, and they talk about that even flying first class is a little bit rough. So we come to find that this is coming from Sakai, who is trying to take out both Abe and Liz here. That eventually this will crash their plane, as both pilots are to be electrified and killed, and the plane is to go crashing down, falling into the water, which, in all honesty, in Abe's case, will do nothing to him, but will go on and eventually have both Abe and uh, both Liz sink into the water as water starts to come in to this plane. And eventually, Abe will have gotten separated from Liz and need to find her within the plane crash. And as Abe moves items, he goes on to find Liz, who is to be still strapped to her, still trapped to her seat, and has gone on to luckily be able to have held her breath just in the nick of time. So Liz will start to run out of air. At some point, she will be like, hey man, hey, I need help. And eventually, Abe will go on to give Liz air. Eventually, they'll go on to explain how Abe is to actually have gotten on to give Liz air, and he'll go on to state that Liz is basically to have breathed in Abe's burps. That just seemed kind of weird to me and kind of funny. So, and they'll have to go on and do this not once but twice because of how long it will take Abe to swim with Liz to get back to air here. Both Liz and Abe will notice a crack in the water of which that they are to go on and find things coming out of it. It looks like tentacles. It looks like probably Agru, whatever the monster is from the first Hellboy movie, maybe making his way through the the cracks of the earth. I'm not really sure. I'm just drawing a bunch of conclusions here. It could just be a dragon. I have no idea what really this thing is. So, as Liz and as Abe make their way to the surface, and Liz ends up getting a breather, they start to surmise that they're not exactly alone here. And Abe tells Liz that maybe they need to start moving away from the shore. And Liz makes Abe more aware that it's like, well, hey, pretty much all that we have here is basically just more shore. So the next thing we see is Sakai and his growing red eyes. Cue now to Red here. He goes on to spot a guy who is carving words into cucumbers, bizarrely. Here's where we get the whole Kappa battle. So, we find this rando character that is to have gone on and carved these names into these cucumbers and is throwing all these cucumbers into the water, hoping that the Kappa will figure out who these people all are and not attack them. So, that is to be, strangely enough, this guy's tactic, hoping that these cucumbers will make the Kappa happy so he doesn't go on this feeding rampage. So, the man goes on and sees Red and is kind of cautious about what he's really there for. And so Red goes on and is to ask the man why he's there. The guy goes on and explains the Kappa monster making cucumbers, and is to realize that this guy is technically feeding this monster. And he's doing it because he doesn't want the monster to attack his family anymore, hoping that these cucumbers will subdue this monster. Because evidently this Kappa likes cucumbers. So, at one point, the Kappa goes on and grabs Red's tail, thrusting him into the water. And the man, all he goes on to ask the guy is like, "What is your name? What is your name?" So I can carve it into this cucumber to try and stop this Kappa from attacking you. It's not going to do much work there, buddy. So the Kappa is pulling Red under the water, grabbing him and further thrusting him into the water. Hellboy goes on and is to be able to make it back to the surface to get a breather, but it ends up getting further and further getting pushed down into the water. The Kappa ends up obtaining the sword away from Hellboy, and Hellboy in turn tries to get it back and does so. We have Hellboy that gets back to a point of further getting to the surface to where he's trying to grab for a rock to try to get out of the water. And eventually the Kappa continues to try to go after Red here. The further and further this battle goes, it eventually starts to reach waterfalls. And both Kappa and Red start to make their way into like a small amount of waterfalls, and the water battle continues here, thrusting Red further and further into the water at certain points. Uh, Red finally is to go on and is to wait for the Kappa to make an attack here. And the man in the background who has carved out the cucumbers is yelling out to Red to spill the water. Red is to see the head of the Kappa pop out of the water and realize at the very top of it there's to be this seemingly almost kind of like somewhat of a bucket on top of its head that is to have seemingly water within it. So we have Red that goes on to try to lure Kappa to him, even calling him Turtle Boy. So yeah, I'm sure they were probably to obviously go on and know about Ninja Turtles 3, and that's probably why they are even referencing Turtle Boy here. So teasing the Kappa that he'll give him something to chew on. The Kappa lunges right at Red, having the Kappa completely now in the air. Red has his arm out and is to grab the Kappa, so now the Kappa is in mid-air. Red goes on to grab the Kappa and is now continuing to punch the Kappa with still the Kappa in the air. The Kappa makes his way splashing into the water, and Red grabs him and continues this fight, continues this brawl, and eventually the continued strategy of getting the water out of the Kappa's just head. But also, Red takes the Kappa, thrusts him out of the water here to where they're now on land. And if it's not quite sure if all the water is out, Hellboy tips the Kappa to where his head is to be upside down to where all the water is starting to pour out. And we then start to see that the Kappa is very much starting to dry up here. The man who had carved the cucumbers is making his way to Red, yelling to him to ask the Kappa a question, and the Kappa will answer him truthfully. So, Red ends up asking the Kappa why is the sword so important. And the Kappa responds with it being so important because it holds the demons. And it is also Red's way home. Break the sword and return home. Break the sword and free the demons. Red ends up going on to ask how exactly he can stop the demons, and there is no answer. Red goes on to chuck the Kappa at the man who had carved up the cucumbers and tells him, hey, uh, keep it away from water. And so Red walks off. Abe and Liz make their way into a cave because, of course, they do, because it's starting to rain here. And again, we have Liz talking about because of the rain, it's another element thing, and she complains about it. So, there is at one point where even, like, Abe is talking about the rain, and Liz is like, you complain about rain? This seems very weird. And Abe is like, well, yeah, this rain is just kind of different. So, different than normal. So, here's where Liz goes on and asks about the whole air thing, and she was very baffled that Abe could even go on and give him air, or give her air. And here's where Abe goes on and talks about the whole burping thing, and Liz gets ever more just kind of like, really? Like, I was breathing in your burps. It's like, well, hey, you survived, right? Um, so we have the bureau that goes on, I guess, through a satellite phone and is now calling Abe. Uh, Abe goes on and informs the bureau how they have lost the pilots, and both him and Liz are both okay. So at this point, the bureau, this agent guy, goes on to explain both to Liz and Abe that it seems that there's a number of supernatural events that are all happening at the same time, and that all airplanes and traffic control has all been grounded for right now, for how bad the weather really is, and that they're going to send soon transportation to their exact location to pick them up. So both Liz and both Abe start talking about the earthquakes. And Liz is to say it's like, well, hey, whatever is going on with those earthquakes, tell agents to make their way there and have big guns with them to, because they're going to have a really just tough threat on their hands. So we all of a sudden have the fox appear. Liz is to spot the fox, and they all of a sudden start talking about Japanese mythology, that a fox is usually considered a mythical creature, and that I guess, if anything, they have to assume that the fox is there for both Liz and both Abe. Liz is to go on and is to consistently like just think that the fox is just some normal animal, hoping that it can just be like, oh, come here, little foxy, yeah, just come here, just yeah, just come on. So as the fox tends to walk away, it seems that both Liz and Abe follow it, and Abe goes on to recognize that the fox doesn't even seem at all wet, to realize that this fox is to actually just be a spirit and it's not really real. The fox eventually leads the two into a cave, and if anything, there's less complaints because at least it's dry. Abe makes a joke, if there's one iota of a mummy here, that he's out. So all of a sudden, there ends up having a light just appear out of nowhere, and Abe naturally assumes that Liz has something to do with it, which Liz is like, no, that wasn't me. All of a sudden, this cave turns into this just a strange area where this elder woman is to go on and just appear here, and it seems that they are to just be surrounded by all these structures, uh, these totem poles, and like all these things of which that are to be very much Japanese in style. Uh, I'm trying to think of the best way to try to describe all these. Um, there's to be a bunch of T pole or double T posing structures that are to be presented here. There's also like what I would assume would be some kind of big statue also in the background that looks kind of like a Buddha of some kind. That is to be just kind of presented with being next to this elder woman. So both Abe and Liz make their way to the older woman, not quite sure what they're in for, and starts talking about Red, mentioning about their friend and how he walks the path of faith's choosing, and that also talks about the two demons, sons of the storms, both thunder and lightning, and that the spirits are already near, and the storms are nothing. Uh, that once both thunder and lightning walk on Earth, the demons will wake their brothers, which is to say that thunder and lightning are to be brothers of dragons. So eventually, this will further probably waken up more dragons, which eventually has me assume that the figure that both Liz and both Abe face off against is a dragon. That's why I assume to just call it a dragon. So now we have randos here. We have a bunch of these random people that are to be in this environment near a church. We have this woman with this stroller and this guy in this trench coat. All of a sudden, the ground around them is starting to erupt and is starting to crack here. We have at one point where a stroller ends up getting away from a woman and she rushes after it. There is to be the guy with the trench coat who goes on and regathers uh, the carriage to give it, or the baby stroller to give it back to the woman as they get the heck out of there. Here's where all of a sudden we see this large dragonish of a head, or whatever this thing is, this tentacle, whatever this thing is, that is to be making its way to attack the world here. So we all of a sudden have a person who is going on and giving some kind of tour to people as their guide. And then all of a sudden, he is to see a building start to crumble with a statue near it that is of a dragon. And we start to see this volcano also have this kind of dragon like thing start to be swimming around into it. Not quite sure what all that means, in all honesty. Next up, we have Red. Red going on to eventually make his way into a face-off with these entities, who of which will end up being called. Let me take a second here. Where is this? Roku Okube. Rokuro. Man, this is hard to pronounce. ROKUR OKUBE. Rakurokube? Rakukurekube. I'm going to go with Rakukurekube. Figuring out if I can go on and pronounce that multiple times. So, Rakukurekube. Jesus Christ. It's just... Any other long-winded names you could just be chucking out here to where I'm just like... Like, am I getting this right? I don't think I'm anywhere ballparkingly effing close. So, I have kind of mistraced my steps here, so I might have to pause here for a second. Like, I'm trying as much as possible to not be insensitive, because I know that there must be some kind of pronouncing of this thing that makes sense in another culture, and me butchering the shit out of it, like it's to probably be really hurtful and offensive to somebody somewhere out there. But these names are getting harder to pronounce. It's super long, and I'm just to be like, god dang, like, how am I going to go on and be able to continue to pronounce this multiple times? The Rako Kurakube, and try to remember if I'm getting that right. So, Red is to go on and see a head floating into, or a head that is making its way through these bamboo sticks, telling Red to come closer and stating that it's a private matter. The woman goes on to explain that the sword doesn't belong to Red, and for him to give it up. And Red goes on to say, "You know what? Like, I'm honestly starting to like this thing." So, further and further, we start to see the women all to start to surround Red here, and eventually we all start to see that they're nothing other than heads with very severely long necks, and that's all we really see, because this is the Roko Korikube. So they all start to wrap around Red here, and they tell Red that they're going to go on and they're going to break the sword and that they're going to have some fun. And Red is to eventually be like, well, no thanks. So eventually the Roko Korikube go on to take Red and shove him off this cliff. And then eventually the next thing we see is Red making his way to this graveyard. Weirdly to me, this very much reminds me of The Crooked Man, where Red is in this graveyard and we just start to see a number of these zombies all start to pop up. And immediately when Red looks at this graveyard, he immediately again is crapping himself. So the Bureau is going on and they're trying to make some assessments about what is going on throughout the world. And the Bureau is kind of left to just being very unsure. And then anytime they're to try and contact anybody on the radio, they're to lose signal. And if anything, also, they realize that wherever I'm sure Liz and Abe are to be, all it is just jungle. So that's probably why they're to get cut off. Abe and Liz go on and make their way back into presence here. So they're continuing to talk to this one elder. Oh, and the guys go on and they talk about how they lost both Abe and Liz, like contact wise, like half an hour ago. So that's what I want to kind of clear up here. So the elder woman goes on to say to Liz and Abe here that their friend has wandered through lands and there are many challenges that he is to go on and face, and the dragons have yet to not fully awaken, and Liz is to go on and ask the elder about the possibility of, like, well, hey, if anything is to go on and happen with the demon brothers, is there any way to defeat them? Is there any chance if there is any clue? And eventually there seems to be none of an answer, and eventually Abe and Liz are just left with getting out of the cave, and Liz is just so frustrated of like, why does even Hellboy put up with this crap? Everybody goes on and talks in riddles and doesn't really give you much of real answers, so you're just left with just like, like. So, back now with Russell, or Thorne, and Kate. So, Kate is going on and asking Thorne to just shut up and close his eyes. And hope that that Thorne is going to give her some kind of vision. Thorne is to go and say that his process doesn't exactly work that way, and Kate is to hope that Thorne is going to figure out where the professor is, and Thorne is to go on and say that Sakai is to be very close, maybe too close. So the next thing we see is Professor Sakai, who is to have an assortment of items. He's to have these flip flops, he's to have this umbrella, he's to have a coda, he's to have this teacup, and he drops them all onto the ground. Kate is to tell Thorn, like, what kind of answer is that of why, of how is it that he's too close? And the next thing we start to see is Flip Flop coming in with these flip flops now having eyeballs on them. As these items start to make their way into the room of both Kate and Thorn, Kate mentions how these items are to be Tsukugamis that are artifact spirits. Supposedly, she goes on to mention how they're harmless, but she would be wrong about that. Eventually, once these items start to come in, like both Thorn and Kate will think that it's cute and it's fun and it's this and that, but eventually, the further and further we go along, the more that eventually there's a scarf that comes in here that wraps around Kate and is to choke her out and take her out here, as well as also that these items will go on and will attack Thorn by pouring through the teacup, will be pouring hot water onto Thorn, and Thorn will go on and be attacked by both the sandals and the coda, and also the umbrella. So, the next thing we see is Red in a graveyard. Eventually, meeting back up with the Dominoes. God, what is his name? Daimyo's, that's what I was trying to say. Daimyo's daughter. And the daughter goes on to explain how she cannot leave until they come for her. And ask why exactly they stay so far away. The fox tells Red that the spirit will wait for an eternity because of her unfinished business not quite being settled. It's all about the demons. If the demons end up getting taken care of, everything will kind of be resolved shortly thereafter that. The daimyo makes his appearance, and we start to realize that all the actors are starting to come into fold here. So, Hellboy is to go on and ask, it's like, okay, how can I free myself without also freeing the demons? And how do I get back at this point? So the next thing we see here is Abe making his way into the water to see what monster is to be under the water because they had seen the crack before. And as Abe is to make his way into the water, he comes to find a shark making his way to him. All of a sudden, the shark is to be eaten up by the dragon monster. Abe makes his way back to Liz and is to explain how big of a size this monster really is for them to have to need to face off against. And goes into very much the whole explanation of just back and forth how really big it is. So, they're trying to figure out what they can really use as a weapon or something to help them out here. And so, if anything, there is just kind of hope that they'll just kind of wait to just get picked up here. Because normally, like, a guy like Hellboy will be a much more benefit to this kind of situation than both either Abe or Liz will. But Abe does have a plan, but the only thing is, it involves fire. It involves Liz to use her power. And Liz is like, well, like, I guess that is true. Like, I guess I do have to fight this thing. And at least the rain did stop. So, Liz is to watch Abe go back in the water. It's like, okay, I'll lure this thing here, and eventually I'll do the easy job. Abe starts to make his way back in the water to realize that the monster is making their way to them. And so Abe tells Liz to start running. The monster spouts its way out of the water, and they say that that's Latharic. Latharic, whatever Latharic means. Lethargic? No, it's lethargic. That's what they're trying to say here. Blah. So here is where the professor goes on and he starts stacking the deck. He goes on and he opens up this scroll and he starts putting up a number of pieces for Hellboy to go up against in the graveyard. A number of zombies, a crow, a number of things. So Hellboy notices within this graveyard that there is a seemingly big, sizable amount of rock that is to be seemingly bubbling up here. And we all of a sudden see coming out of it a giant skeleton. Red is to eventually go on and run away from the skeleton, which is to all of a sudden leave a number of cracks within the graveyard. And Hellboy almost falls into one. As Hellboy tries to regain himself out of this hole, he is to all of a sudden be met by a number of zombies that are to be behind him. There is to seemingly be a character dressed in robe that has a skull for a staff that is to have a giant skeleton behind it. What rationale is this thing to be there? Not quite sure, but it's to just be a piece that I can go on and describe here. There is to also be a number of warriors that are starting to make their way out of these cracks, these green cracks. We have a samurai warrior that goes on and has a sword coming from its heart, ripping the sword out of his heart to go on and be like, okay, I'm going to face off with Hellboy with the sword. So Hellboy starts whipping out his revolver and starts firing away at any of the zombies. Going on further to not only like fire his revolver, but it is also having him just start to run off because of the numbers. Eventually, Hellboy runs out of bullets, so he whips out his sword. It's like, okay, this is just getting better and better. Red is outnumbered, and all he has is a sword, and that's it. So, the next thing is Liz facing off Flame, immersing her against this dragon of a creature, and eventually the dragon, through it, the head of it is to start to burst into flame. Liz turns to Abe and says that there's no way that that was so easy just to defeat this thing. And the monster comes back out of the water to then have both Abe and Liz hide out. Abe turns to Liz and is like, well, hey, I don't think that this is working at all. Should we just retreat and hide in a cave? And Liz is to go on and be like, no, I'm not going to hide. So she again, her entire body engulfs in flame and strikes at this monster yet again. Both Kate and both uh, Thorn here are facing off against these artifacts, and Kate ends up asking Thorn where exactly Sokai is. Thorn mentions that Sakai is at the shrine. So the next thing we see is the shrine. Hellboy goes on and is to continue to face off against all these zombies at this bridge, doing his best to defend himself and continuing to face off against all these foes. We have Sakai that puts on the board a Oni, whatever monster that is. This huge monster that ends up getting a big piece on this board. So we now all of a sudden at this bridge have all the zombies that have kind of just made way for this massive Oni monster that has this giant sword and is going to face off against Red here. Red again, here's another crap. Red continues to face off against Oni, but it's kind of a Red is facing off against a huge foe here. Very much way bigger than him. Probably 2 to 3 times like, and that's being generous of of size matching here. This thing is huge. So Red is dodging this guy's attacks and then eventually goes on to try to figure out a way to start slicing down this Oni. And further and further, Red is dodging all of these attacks to continue to try and slice away at this Oni. Slicing it off at the leg, slicing it off by the eye, eventually taking down this Oni, but it is to have gone on to become very difficult. As Red tries to go on and give a final blow, we all of a sudden have Hellboy accidentally break the sword off of this statue. All of a sudden, just out of nowhere. So, Hellboy has now gone on to be tricked into breaking this sword. And Hellboy is to go on and see that the sword has bled and that the inscription of the sword is now lighting up green. And now Hellboy is to be back at near the shrine, and Kate is to go on and ask if Red is okay, and Red asks where the Sword of Storms is, and or no, I think Kate probably asks where it's either Red or Kate ends up asking where the sword is, and they find it bleeding on the ground. and Sakai ends up like Sakai at this point is freaking huge. He's like Hunchback of Notre Dame at this point. That's how big he is and how warped his body is. After the sword is now broken, thunder and lightning both appear into the sky. Both both brothers here appear. We have Liz facing off against Dragon and further using her flame. So both brothers of dragons go on and use their hammers and spears to cause a weather of they start to cause more lightning and start to have more clouds appear, causing a chaos of weather to occur upon the area of which they are now to be in. So both Thunder and Lightning are to start to notice that their brothers are starting to call them their other dragons, and that they eventually will soon appear. Supposedly bringing down the world of puny men, and so Hellboy is to be pissed at this point, and he's like, "All right, good, we're gonna fight it out now because I'm pissed. So let's get this on with." So we have Hellboy that takes this rock and chucks it at Lightning, and the Lightning is the white one, not the purple one. Thunder and Lightning go on to tell Red here that there is only one weapon that they feared, and it's already broken. So what is Red going to be able to do anything of right now? You would honestly think that, like, what should have happened here is honestly Red should have distracted both Thunder and Lightning, and Kate and Thorn should have just ran off to some sword maker somewhere for them to just, or some random blacksmith, and for them to have gone on and fixed the sword. But I guess that's kind of like, who's going to be able to have the ability to do that during this modern age? But still, you would have thought if anything, like that would have been a thing that should have happened in this, where like Kate and Thorn should have ran off with the sword to fix it, but they didn't. But if anything, kind of what they also go on and do does actually go on and make quite a bit of sense here. Even though technically the sword is still technically broken. Moving on. So they end up calling Red like an ugly monkey, like something along those lines. And so it's like, like you called me an ugly monkey, eh? So Hellboy whips out his revolver, and eventually we have Thunder that takes out his hammer and starts attacking Hellboy. Both Thunder and Lightning will continue to face Hellboy here and continue to attack him. And both Kate and Thorn will go on to find Professor Sakai and be surprised about how in way better shape that he is now compared to the hunchback of which that he just recently looked. So Professor Sakai goes on and takes out his glasses and looks at Kay and realizes that he remembers her. Realizing that Kate had gone on to at some point talk about trolls, and Kate is to kind of shake Sakai out of it and say, "Hey, you've just been possessed. Like, how much do you remember? Like, so, like, if anything, Hellboy is obviously facing off against Thunder and Lightning right now. Shouldn't this be the main focus? So, Hellboy at this point is just dodging both Thunder and Lightning's attacks, trying to figure out some way to grapple or to brawl with them and try to stop them, because he doesn't definitively have a weapon that is in well good use to face off against these foes. Like, they didn't give him like, and here's the real problem here. There's a lot of times where, like, you would think that they would just have all these weapons just lying around for Hellboy to use, but they don't. Anyways, pushing on. So eventually Hellboy does go on and obtain Thunder's hammer and takes it away from him and then chucks it through a window. And Thunder just starts to continue to look at the window, and Hellboy's just like, just go after the hammer. Just do it. So Thunder does go after the hammer, and I thought that bit was actually really pretty funny here. So Lightning does go on and strike Hellboy here, and he goes flying through a window. And Sakai, Kate, and Thorn are all watching Hellboy get attacked here. And at one point, Hellboy is very much under a tree. They yell to him to get away from the tree because, of course, a tree could be very much a proper conductor. So Hellboy goes on to face off against Lightning, and at some point goes on to figure out a way to grab his spear away from him. And as Lightning starts to make some lightning bits of attack here, we have Hellboy trying to take the spear and stab it into Lightning to try to figure out a way of defeating either, or to figure out a way to possibly stall or defeat Lightning in some capacity. Liz goes on to continue facing off against Dragon, and as Abe eventually goes on to get captured by Dragon, uh, eventually Abe is to be thrusted away, and eventually Liz is to find where Abe is, and eventually Liz is to kind of turn off her her flames to eventually make her way to Abe to see if he's okay. Hellboy goes on to take Lightning's spear and have Lightning's spear fall into him, as Hellboy is to kind of lift Lightning up and then have Lightning fall onto the spear. Further and further, the attacks from Thunder and Lightning become way too much for Hellboy. Fire is starting to appear on Hellboy's trench coat, as like the just continuing all these attacks are just really hurting Hellboy, to the point of him needing to just drag away from both Thunder and Lightning because he is just so tired at this point. As soon as Hellboy slips away here, both Thunder and Lightning start to follow Hellboy. Hellboy goes on to one final attack, and he brings in the Sword of Storms. He goes on to take the sword and jabs it into both the chest of Thunder and Lightning. Surprisingly, this attack works, and it defeats the both of them, having both of the brothers make their way back into the soul of the Sword of the Storm to be captured, to eventually find out that this is the final way to be able to defeat these two brothers. The dragon goes on and eventually is to dissipate back into the water and is to disappear and makes his way back in the cracks and vanishes. Abe turns to Liz and immediately figures out that Hellboy must be back and have figured out a way to have defeated the brothers, and like they realize that they have won. So so this is to be the wrapping up the end of the movie. I think pretty soon here. Thank goodness. So you would honestly think that Hellboy at this point would go on and would tell both Kate and everybody, like, I'm on vacation. I'm gonna take a nap. Immediately when I get on the plane, sleeping is gonna be had by me. I don't care what you guys say. I don't care what mission you're on. I don't care. I'm gonna sleep. So Hellboy makes his way back to Kate and Thorn and Sakai. Kate gives Hellboy the good old thumbs up. Red assumes that there's a possibility that not all things are quite exactly all wrapped up here. And then all of a sudden, out of the shadows, we start to see that Kate is to all of a sudden turn into the daimyo's daughter, and also Thorn is to turn into the daimyo, and the daimyo is to take the blade and is to want to go on and strike his daughter down yet again. Red goes on to make his way to finally stop all this. And what eventually does happen, Red goes on and takes the warrior statue and is to knock Thorn out with it. And so Thorn gets taken down, and this is where finally the samurai warrior appears and meets up with his lover, and the two of them hug it out. And here is where the daimyo comes in, and Red tells him, it's like, hey, can't you stop this now? Use your head. You have to forgive them at some point, right? You're never gonna win. So finally, the daimyo does bow to the samurai warrior and finally disappears, and also so do both daimyo's daughter and the samurai warrior. Red mentions that he wants some aspirin and some breakfast, and we get to see the elder woman turn back into the fox, and we see Red kind of see the fox, and the fox disappears, and Hellboy is just kind of looking off. I was like, yeah. So now, that's me wrapping up this movie. I'm gonna get that out of here. Almost 2.5 hours. I would have loved it to have been shorter, but it is what it is. Thank you for watching this. There was a lot of times where I was just like, I have no idea what to say here. Um, because a lot of this movie, even though how short it is, it's just like there's so much detail, and there's a lot of stuff where I'm just like, God dang it, I just want to just make my way through this freaking thing. Uh, if anything, I'm sure this thing won't probably do anything. No one will probably care about it anyways, or if it does blow up, then that'll be surprising. Uh, but if it does too well, then I'll be grateful. But this will end up just also being just another piece of content that I can do for a day. I would have loved to have doubled up and done more than one piece of content today, but I'm sure with all that I need to grind for, as well as long as all this took for me to do today, I doubt that that's going to be a possibility. But either way, thank you for watching this. However long you were going to go on and really stand to really listen to any of this, thank you for checking this out. I'm going to get the heck out of here now so I can go on and do other things. Thank you. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.